Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Monday, August 17th. Man, we're on the back end of August. It's hard to believe. You know, we started TechStrong TV, I guess it was March. And spring has come and gone. Summer is rapidly moving. We've got maybe a month left of official summer, but you know, come Labor Day or so here in the U.S. anyway, which is around September 5th, it's kind of marks the end of summer and the beginning of fall. Football season, looking forward, hoping we'll have an NFL season this year. So far, it looks okay. We just won't be able to go to the games in person, but that's okay. It's better than nothing. Anyway, though, we hope you had a great weekend. That you're safe and you're well and doing work. You know, we've gotten so many different data points over the last few months that while, you know, in certain sectors of the economy, there's been carnage, there's been shrinkage, there's been, you know, such heartache with people losing jobs and businesses going under and, you know, so many retailers filing for Chapter 11 and so forth. At least here in our tech industry, as it relates to digital transformation and cloud native, DevOps, cybersecurity, we've been blessed to go relatively unscathed compared to so many other sectors of the worldwide economy. So for that, I'm grateful. You should be grateful. I think we're all grateful for that, and we hope things continue to get better for everyone and stay well here for us in our tech bubble, if you will. That being said, we've got a great show lined up for you today. It is going to be packed with some great interviews that we've done. My first interview today is actually with my friend Derek Weeks, who's a vice president at Sonatype. He's also the co-founder for All Day DevOps. And we're going to talk to Derek about the 6th annual State of the Software Supply Chain report that him and others, he works with Gene Kim and some others, have come out with. And Derek's going to give us the scoop on what's new and what insights are gleamed for this year, as well as give us an early look at All Day DevOps coming up in November. So Derek will tell us about that, and happy to be joined by him. Then we're going to go to another friend, Brian Gracely at Red Hat. This week we're coming up on KubeCon Virtual, or the KubeCon CNCF Summit, and Red Hat is making several announcements as part of KubeCon this year. Brian's going to go through those with us and give us a peek into each one. Then another friend, my friend Raj Dutt, who's CEO at Grafana Labs, right? Grafana Labs, people behind Grafana, Loki. They're also one of the biggest supporters of the CNCF project, Prometheus. So Grafana Labs just announced that they raised a Series B. I want to say it was Lightspeed Ventures is their lead investor, and they led this round as well. Their Series B was for $50 million, so they've raised a total of about $74 million, I believe now. And Raj is going to tell us what they're doing with the money, how they really, are bullish on the open source model and open source community, and what they're doing to support the various open source projects that they support as part of their work at Grafana Labs. So Raj Dutt from Grafana. Then we're going to go back to something old today, as we normally do, and we're going to be doing it, obviously, from our TechStrong Con, which we've been mining since early June. And today's TechStrong Con session, repeat, is Ben Hindeman. Ben is a co-founder and CTO over at D2IQ. And Ben's session is a comprehensive guide for getting to day 2. That's sort of second day DevOps, if you will. Good presentation by Ben. I think you'll enjoy it. After that, I'll be back with our news roundup of what's hot over in the neighborhoods of media ops. And then turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops. And Charlene's guest today is Campbell Brown, CEO of Predict HQ. Should be a good one. Then Charlene will also, we have a full Charlene will give you a preview of the full range of webinars we have for us here. We have for you here this week on MediaOps. There's some really good ones, including one on the 18th, tomorrow, that I am doing. It's called Dev Everything Ops, and it's not a slideshow. It's an interactive panel roundtable with friends of mine like Wolfgang Kandick, of CTO co-founder of Tricentis. We've got Anders Wahlgren of CloudBees, a VP Technology, Mitch Ashley of Accelerated Strategies Group, Jane Grohl of the DevOps Institute, and but certainly not least, Caroline Wang of Chief Strategy Officer over at Cobalt.io, who's also going to be making some news. But it's going to be a great discussion on Dev Everything Ops. That's the 18th. It's early. I believe it's at 9 in the morning, East Coast time, right in the middle of the day if you're watching this over in Europe. Maybe you can catch it from Asia as well. It will be available on demand as well. But check that out. And then after that, I'll introduce Mitch Ashley over in the Analyst Corner. Has some great video today. And I'll be back to wrap things up. Yeah, typical almost 2.5, 3 hours worth of TechStrong TV here on this glorious Monday. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to be right back with our first guest.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another TechStrong TV segment. I'm joined in this segment by my good friend Derek Weeks, VP of Sonatype. Hey Derek, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. Always good to be here. Always good to see you.
Always a pleasure. Well, it's always good to see you as well, Derek, especially in these crazy times. And we can't see each other in person as we normally would at on the conference circuit, but it's good to see you. For those of you who don't know, Derek is the co-founder of All Day DevOps, along with another friend of mine, Mark Miller. And All Day DevOps is probably the largest online DevOps. I don't know if it's online or not online, makes no difference. It's the largest DevOps conference in the world. It's going into its 5th year. I think it's out November, is it 6th or 7th?
November 12th. After the U.S. elections.
That's true, yeah. Well, you want to do it on the election day. You're right. But anyway, we'll talk more about All Day DevOps at the end of our interview. In addition to co-founding All Day DevOps, Derek is also the primary author and kind of the guiding light and force behind the State of Software Supply Chain report, which is now in its 6th year as well. And it's a great report. It's one I always enjoy perusing and then diving into over the weeks and months. So great job as usual on this year's report, Derek.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited about it. It's pretty cool. I should say, I've been writing this for 6 years, and at some point as you're into writing it, you're just like, what are we trying to say? How much data have we analyzed? What's the story behind it? But you don't always step back and read the whole thing end to end because you're so focused on it. But I did that this weekend before we released it as kind of one final review. And it's like, wow, we actually put together a pretty impressive report this year.
Yeah. Not that other years weren't
more so
impressive.
Than other years, So it's
really?
like, wow, and it's 6th year. I think we have improved, year after year. So
we're going to dig into that. But first, Derek, maybe there's a few folks out here who are not familiar with the report. And let's start by framing what is the report about? What does it attempt to show? And, what's the aims of it, the goals here?
Yeah, so it has a couple of different aims. One is that we all know that open source is being used as to accelerate innovation within DevOps teams, within any development teams. There's a lot of open source being used, and part of the report just sheds light on how much open source is being used. But it's not just about quantity of open source, it's quality of open source as well. So if we're going to use open source components and packages to build applications, what are the best packages and the best suppliers out there? And then also, what are the best practices in enterprises for using these things? And we're able to quantify differences between low performers and high performers, or elite performers in terms of open source projects themselves, as well as enterprise development teams that are using them. And then we always do a bit of covering insight into how government policy and regulation is directing the use of open source. Is regulation coming more into play, or policies coming more into play? So a little bit from Washington, as well as other countries around the world, to kind of get an insight on how development might be influenced by regulation.
Excellent. And the previous 5 years of the report are, of course, available. Yep. Up on the Sonatype site. All right. I think we've laid that foundation well, as they taught us in law school, Derek. Let's now jump into this year's report. And, why do you think it's the best one? What made this one so great?
Well, I think, a couple of things really stand out to me. The volume of open source being used, the changes in adversarial attacks, and also just great quantitative data on high performing versus low performing enterprise development teams. So the first thing out of the report that's kind of a sensational number more than anything, but it is telling to how much open source is being used. We project that there will be 1.5 trillion open source component and container downloads this year. And to think about, pick your number of developers around the world. It's 15 million, 20 million, 20. Okay, whatever that number is.
That's the last number I saw.
Divide 1.5 trillion by that.
It's almost Carl Sagan numbers already. Billions and billions. And, it's really hard to wrap your head around that big a number.
Yeah, if you walk back to 2017, that's when we crossed 100 billion. And in 2012, we crossed 10 billion. So the accelerated use of open source to feed innovation into, we're always talking about high velocity development, high performance development, high quality development. Well, this is what is feeding that. If 90% of an application being built today is using these open source components, you get a good sense of there is a amazing amount of open source being used. And I think, we're all benefiting from that.
So I'd like to dig into that 1.5 trillion, what makes up that 1.5 trillion, if it's okay. You said it was open source and containers.
Yep. Yeah.
So is every time someone downloads a Docker image from Docker Hub or whatever it's called now,
so Docker Hub,
counts in the 1.5.
Docker Hub, we're projecting 96 billion downloads from Docker Hub this year. And just a couple of years ago, I remember we were reporting in the report, as we do each year, it was like, wow, Docker Hub just went from 4 billion to 8 billion downloads. Isn't that amazing? Like, those numbers are huge. And now we're almost at 100 billion for, containerized applications.
100 billion here, 100 billion there. Before you know it, you're talking big numbers. But so you got 100 billion from Docker Hub. Now, Sonatype, of course, manages Nexus.
Yeah.
What's the number there, you think?
Yeah, so we run Maven Central, which has all the Java components for that community. So for calendar 2019, we saw 226 billion download requests. This was up from, I think it was 150 billion the year before, so up significantly. And I just looked at the May and June numbers. Assuming those continue, it's growing substantially this year as well. But just based on annualizing May and June numbers, we'll be at 350 billion or so this year, 370 billion. So it's just, you can't imagine these numbers, they're so large. But it just goes to show you there's a lot of developers using these, and there's a lot of automated tooling that is driving hey, just as you're doing this build, pull down this new component or the latest version of that component. Sure. So there's a lot of automation behind this as well.
Well, there is, but because I think people in the audience say first of all, it's such a big number, it is hard to wrap your head around. Yeah. They say 1.5 trillion, come on, he's pulling that out of his butt. Where does he come up with that? But when you start 100 billion here and 350 billion there, I mean, those two sources alone are almost 1/3 of your 1.5 trillion.
The biggest source behind all of this is NPM packages. So if you look at, you go to NPM, and anyone that logs into NPM can see these stats, but they had 95 billion downloads in July. If you annualize that, you're over 1 trillion just in the NPM community alone. Yeah. Right? So these are public numbers. I'm just gathering and consolidating them for people to read.
No, I would say almost
1.5 trillion may wind up being conservative, quite frankly, as crazy as that sounds. So, so certainly the magnitude of the components and downloads that are going into our builds today are greater than they've ever been. Yeah. Now, go from there, Derek. Let's take that to its logical conclusion. How does that manifest itself in some of the other data that you see?
Yeah, so one of the scarier, surprising things that we saw from this year's report, we've always talked about how adversaries are taking advantage of open source vulnerabilities. The Equifax Struts breach, SaltStack breaches back in at the end of April, beginning of May. They all play into this, and there have been a lot of open source vulnerabilities. But we talk about this difference in this year's report between legacy software supply chain attacks and next-gen attacks. And the legacy attacks are, there's a vulnerability that gets discovered in a component. It's announced today, a new version's available, and then enterprises race to update before adversaries are racing to exploit it. So it's a kind of wait and pray scenario. Well, there's been a lot of investment in the past few years since the Equifax breach of organizations saying, I don't want to be the next Equifax, so how do I avoid this? And they're investing in different technologies and processes to reduce that threat. And we saw that in our annual DevSecOps community survey. Open source related breaches have gone down 10% a year since 2018. But adversaries, knowing investments are being made in protecting against these vulnerability or their ability to exploit these vulnerabilities, have shifted their attack vector. They're going after the open source projects themselves and saying, if I can contribute to an open source project that's really popular and contribute malicious code into that project that is then fed downstream, I'm just injecting my own 0 days into these components that I can then exploit later. The vulnerabilities are not known by anyone but me because I'm the one that injected them. And we're seeing this play out more and more. We've reported on this in previous years, but this in the past 4 years from March 2015 to June 2019, there were about 200 attacks. From July last year to May of this year, we saw 900 attacks. So the attacks were up 430% in this next generation style of attack, which says the adversaries have shifted from legacy software supply chain attacks to this next generation style of attack because it's more efficient for their businesses to do that, right? So that was surprising because we saw this pattern emerging a couple of years ago and started reporting on it, but last year was eye-opening when we saw how many of these style attacks there were. And quite honestly, there's no to very few commercial solutions that begin to address this next generation style of attack. So when you're looking for, hey, if that's happening, let me buy a tool, you can't find a tool on the market that's doing that.
Yeah. Not right. It's interesting. I did an interview maybe a month ago, and it was a survey of like hackers, of black hats, and other security expert research folks about, how do you look to a hacker, right? What's a hacker's view of, just because you think something is a critical vulnerability or what have you, from hackers, as you said, that it's a business.
It's a business to them.
It's a business.
And they look at things.
Like just what you're talking about here. Hey, I've got something that there's no tool to. I've got this new class of thing that right now it's like a novel coronavirus, if you will. Sorry, the Apple Watch is going off on me here, but it's a novel virus. No pun intended. And so they're going to use it.
Yeah, hackers used to be going after networks. People invest a lot in the networks. The adversaries shift to applications. They're shifting to applications. Investment is shifting to applications, and the adversaries are saying, "I need a more efficient place to go," and they're shifting to open source projects. So it's just finding the easiest path to exploit, because adversaries have competitors too, and they're racing to exploit vulnerabilities. And what's better than creating your own in code that's got 100,000 downloads a month? Like, just exploit your malicious or insert your malicious code there and take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Now, amazingly, with all of the COVID and everybody working from home, Derek, this has got to exasperate an already not great situation, right? With potential code being exploited and everything. And yes, we've had some breaches, and yes, there's been a whole pandemic of cyber kind of attack while all of this is going on, because they never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a calamity, right? But I mean, all in all, we've almost been I don't want to say it and jinx it, but we've almost been lucky that we haven't had another Equifax, or that we know of anyway, another Equifax level sort of breach at this point. But, with the numbers the way they are, is it a matter of time? Or do is the glass half empty, half full? Do you think we're making progress, Derek?
When you look at how the attacks are happening, or what the adversaries are shifting to, that worries me, because like I said, there's no commercial solutions available for this kind of thing. It's very hard to detect. If you and I contribute to an open source project, open source communities are like, "Hey, great, Derek and Alan are contributing code." Like, that's just making it better for all of us. They don't know if my code is malicious unless they're looking at this as from a security lens, right? If you're not a security expert, you may not know how to identify the backdoor that I just put in your Python package. But that said, the other part of the report, for a couple of years now, we've been partnering with Gene Kim and Dr. Stephen McGill on producing this report and doing the research. And we figured out in this report, we reveal differences between organizations and how they're managing software supply chains. And there were 4 different behavioral clusters that came out of this. Those that emphasize, and I'll talk about 3. Those that emphasize security, so they're like, "Hey, we're really strong on security. We don't care to move very fast." There were those that said, "I'm going to move really fast and I don't care as much about security." And then there were those that said, "I'm going to move fast and do security." And the really cool thing that we discovered, and you never know until you look at the data, is there's always this security first team that's like, if we go faster, we're going to be less secure. And there's the high productivity group that's like, if we add security, we're going to slow down. And neither want to do that. And what we found is that the average result on the high performers doing high performance development and that had strong security outcomes, they actually were more secure and faster than the high performance groups and the security first group. So this idea or trope that this is going to slow you down or make you less secure, we're actually disproving with the data in this year's report that says, on average, you improve security while you get faster.
So I got to tell you, as counterintuitive as that seems, I'm not surprised. I remember having a discussion with Damon Edwards and John Willis. I think it was at a Gene Kim DevOps Enterprise Summit in London. I'm going to say 3 years ago. Yeah. Because I don't think it was at the Q2 yet. It was still at a different hotel. and it was a presentation that John and Damon did that we spoke about. It was something like you can't have it all, right?
Yeah.
That going faster, but utilizing like kind of DevOps frameworks and so forth would result in you going faster with better quality, including more security. And that to me was always, that's frankly why I got into DevOps.
Yeah.
The idea that we could build security in, shifting left and all those things that we've spoken about all these years, that as counterintuitive as it seems, by doing so, eventually, maybe not initially, but eventually, we will go faster with better quality, right?
Yeah.
We will, we'll do it. And that, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. 3 out of 3 is great. And
I think that the theory for me, the theory was always there. You can move fast and be secure, but it was kind of more of a aspiration of like, let's all get there and see. And now we have data to support that. The other thing that was interesting was in this high performer group that was doing security well and productivity well, they also had the most satisfied employees, which, that kind of finding is reiterated in the state of DevOps reports year after year. The high performers or elite performers have the happiest employees. So we were seeing the same things in this finding is, the DevSecOps teams that move fast and are secure have happier employees too. So there is a third benefit that comes along with, these kind of investments.
yeah, and I agree with that. I'll mention one other thing because it was something you talked about, and that is a lot of the threat research teams, for instance. I did one with the Palo Alto threat research team, and I don't remember their name now, like Group 42 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. But they found like Docker containers, and you mentioned there's, what was it, 100 and something billion, Docker container downloads from Docker Hub. Malicious people had put, similar sounding names to the most popular Docker container downloads up there that contained, in this case, it wasn't even backdoors, similar to the Twitter hack. It was people that contained stuff that could turn your machine into a zombie to do Bitcoin mining for them.
Yep.
Right? It wasn't anything more. It could have just as easily been ransomware or something else. In this case, it was Bitcoin mining.
But the same thing's happening in open source. There's a component named Colorama, and if you spell color in the British spelling, which CLOUR, right? The real component is COLOR, right? But if you spell it with a U, you get the malicious package. But
that's been an internet game for as long as I remember, right? How many people would register domain names that were a slight misspelling of a popular domain?
Yeah.
And you'd be confronted with porn or some other wonderful thing you want to look at. But
it works.
That's why this is why we don't have nice things. We can't have nice things. But anyway, hey, Derek, we're coming up on the end of time.
Yep.
Not the end of time, the end of our time on this interview. Let's hope not. But anything else important, highlights on the report you want to bring out?
One, I would just say, if anyone wants the report, you can Google search 2020 State of Software Supply Chain Report, or go to the Sonatype's website, go under our resources link on the homepage, and you'll find white papers there. We're part of the white paper page there. And certainly we'd love your feedback on the report and how to improve it, what to look at next. For all the researchers out there in the community, we love collaborating with others on putting this report together. There's a lot of data that comes from a lot of places. So if you have something interesting, let's get together and collaborate as we already start on producing the 2021 report today.
All right. Great job on this year's report, Derek, and thanks for all the hard work on it. Before we leave, though, let's return quickly to All Day DevOps.
Yeah.
What can you tell people?
November 12th, All Day DevOps. It's really easy. We're online for 24 hours. We will have over 180 speakers this year. It is free to attend. There are no vendor pitches as part of this. This is all practitioners and thought leaders just sharing their information, and we have thousands of conversations in our Slack workspace during the day. So it's a very interactive community. Last year, we had nearly 40,000 people participate in it. As Alan said, it's the biggest DevOps conference on the planet. So we always say, register yourself, register your teams, watch together, even if you're all on Zoom remotely. But it's a good time, and we have a really solid agenda coming up. So you can register today, and we'll keep you informed of the agenda as we're rolling it out. We already have many of the speakers announced for the conference. So November 12th, join us. We'll be there. We stay up for 24 hours and run the whole thing.
So, and it's alldaydevops.com or ADD?
Yep, alldaydevops.com.
Right.
Yep.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Hey, Derek, a pleasure seeing you. One day we'll see each other again in person.
I hope. Stay safe. I hope your
do
family
my best.
stays
Same
safe
to you.
as well.
Same to you, my friend. All right. Good, great work. Keep it up. We'll see you at All Day DevOps, if nothing else. Derek Weeks, VP Sonatype, State of Software Supply Chain Report. It's 6th year. Check that out as well. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Brian Gracely is someone we usually go to when Red Hat has news. This year's KubeCon, which was supposed to be earlier in the year and was supposed to be in Amsterdam, and we were so looking forward to going there and covering it as Digital Anarchist. Of course, we can't do that, but it is virtual this year, as so many other events are, and we are really happy to have Brian from Red Hat to preview the several announcements that Red Hat will be making around KubeCon CNCF Summit this year. So let's go now to my interview with Brian Gracely of Red Hat and find out what news Red Hat has in store for us.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment for TechStrong TV. My guest this segment is Brian Gracely of Red Hat. If you've been watching, DevOps.com, Container Journal, or listening to podcasts over the years, we've interviewed Brian before. He's always a wealth of information about what's going on in the world of Red Hat and OpenShift. Hey Brian, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, Alan. Great to be with you again. Wish we could be doing this in person, but great to hear from you.
You and me both. I mean, I'm in tech over 30 years, Brian. I've never been home this long before.
Right. Right.
I don't know how my wife's putting up with me, but anyway, this is the first time I think you've been on TechStrong TV, which we started when this whole COVID thing started,
right,
in March. So, welcome to TechStrong TV. But you're certainly no stranger to our audience. But Brian, why don't you just give people a little bit of your background, your title, your role with Red Hat?
Yeah, sure. So Brian Gracely, I'm Senior Director of Product Strategy for in Red Hat's Cloud Platform Group. Primary focus is around OpenShift, which is our Kubernetes platform, our hybrid cloud platform. So a lot of my focus is digital transformation, containerizing applications, cloud native, that whole space that everybody that would be normally attending KubeCon is circling around. So that whole gravity.
Absolutely, and you mentioned KubeCon, and of course, look, they were hoping to actually pull it off in the Netherlands in August.
Right.
When they first moved it, I think it was originally June.
Yeah.
Right, and then it was put off to August, and I knew it. Highly doubtful, and then of course they went virtual with it. I was looking forward to going to Amsterdam, I have to be honest with you, but nevertheless, it is virtual and it is coming up. in the next, I guess, week or so. Red Hat has a bunch of announcements.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I mean, like any good vendor at the biggest cloud native show in the world, we're gonna try and announce some new things. Yeah, let me give you the kind of the high level of them, and I don't want to go through the whole list. Obviously, there'll be press releases. A couple of really powerful technologies are coming out as GA. So GA obviously being they've been in beta, they've been people. We're trying to do sort of the central IT digital transformation thing. So early Kubernetes clusters tended to be very large, very multi-tenant. They were trying to kind of bring a lot of groups into one fold, same policies, same stuff. And that worked fine, but obviously we've seen more and more people get familiar with Kubernetes, lots of people, doing their own thing, lines of business doing their own thing. And what that's done is it's create this, huge sort of sprawl of clusters, clusters that are, a single application, a small group. Some are running in the public cloud, some are in other clouds. And so ultimately we had to figure out, a really good way to be able to kind of wrangle those all together. And Advanced Cluster Manager is our tool, our framework really for, how do we manage thousands of clusters? How do you have consistent policy, consistent ways to deploy them, no matter where they run? So it's, completely cloud independent. It allows us to manage both OpenShift clusters, but also the clusters that are running in the public cloud, a GKE, AKS, EKS cluster. So really excited to kind of get people more control over what they're trying to do as their environment sprawl.
And to me, this is really a signpost up ahead. Mm-hmm. Kubernetes entered the enterprise zone, right? Because this is a true enterprise kind of feature set, right?
Right.
It's one thing you're going to run a small. It doesn't necessarily have to even be small, but I'm going to run a Kubernetes install here, and maybe I'll have a Kubernetes install there. But when I start recognizing that I have, Kubernetes installs kind of all over the place, and I need a place to centrally kind of manage them all in a coherent way, I think that screams maturity. It screams enterprise, and it's an important part of the maturation process. Right.
Well,
that we have customers who need that.
Yeah, it's that. And then, another sort of angle that we're starting to see with it is, companies are getting more familiar with Kubernetes, really getting more familiar with containerizing apps. And they're coming to us and they're saying, hey, we want to deploy this in 1,000 remote locations, right? So a distribution office, a branch office, it has some implications as to, how the telephone companies, the telcos are starting to roll out services at the edge. So, this idea that I've got to be able to manage, thousands and thousands of quote unquote locations or clusters, you're right. It's very enterprisey because it screams to the maturity of Kubernetes, but it also has these sort of second generation type of applications that are starting to spawn out of that.
Excellent. And the other nice thing is it's not locking you in necessarily to using Red Hat OpenShift. Right. It's whatever you use, and because we don't have green fields where you can't expect people to go throw out what they've built, over the last couple of years. So good stuff there.
Yeah,
good stuff.
The second one, is sort of an interesting thing. It's forever. We call it KubeCon. It's Cloud Native Con. It's always been about containers. The other big thing we really got from a lot of companies was they said, look, we love this path we're going down, but the reality is we can't get far enough along. We kind of don't get all the benefits of faster application development. Sometimes our DevOps stuff doesn't apply to some of the existing applications we have. And they've been asking for years now, like, are we going to get away from this silo of managing containers one way and existing applications in virtualization in VMs another way? And so we finally have GA'd supporting native virtualization, essentially, VMs, as a first-class citizen in OpenShift and in Kubernetes. So we call it OpenShift virtualization. It brings virtual machines into the fold, and it's really interesting because it does a couple of things, right? The first one is people think, okay, I can move an older application under Kubernetes. It gets scheduled the same way, and that's absolutely true. There's a lot of use cases for that. The more interesting one that we found is we've rolled this out and talked to a lot of companies is a lot of developers don't really want to care about, does it run in a container or VM, right? They know, like, I have a database, but I also have this sort of cool new front end that I'm working on, and I might need both of them. And they hated the fact that, like, it might take them 3 months to get a virtual machine, but they could spin up containers really quickly. Giving developers self-service access to both of them, so that they can roll out applications any way they want to, has been really powerful. So, it was a little bit of a surprise to us. We were really just trying to help people bring some existing stuff forward, but every time you give developers self-service access to stuff, you stop making them have tickets, you take friction out of it. It always ends up being a really big win. And this has been really exciting for us to see developers be like, look, you just took 3 months of a wait time out of my queue and I can get started again.
That's really cool. It's almost counterintuitive that we do it. Let me ask, what hypervisors does this support?
So it leverages the KVM hypervisor. So it's going to run natively with, on top of Linux, which, is great for Kubernetes. But the nice part is it's not limited to Linux. It'll run Windows guests. It'll run Linux guests. So those people that are kind of on the fence of, like, do I put Windows in containers? This gives you some options. You can do Windows in containers. You can keep them in VMs. We're starting to see applications like SAP and some applications that modernize SAP start to take advantage of this. So, it has kind of a broad applicability. And the nice thing is it kind of breaks down that barrier where people said, okay, well, that's going to be on one system. That's a VM-centric system. This is going to be on a container-centric system. Now they can just say, look, I have them both in one place. I can staff up my platform level team to manage both of those. And I get away from silos. I save cost. I start to build better process around these, around no matter what the application is.
Very cool. Again, another maturation kind of signpost, right?
Yeah.
People are recognizing no one wants to manage 12 different infrastructure
Right.
kind of platforms, right? And if you can manage them all from one place.
Yeah.
That's a win. It's got to be a win.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in today's world where, people are having to rethink what their jobs look like. They're having to rethink where they work. The more you can kind of avoid the silos, it's useful. I want to hit on a couple of things that are maybe interesting in a broader community sense, especially since we sort of let in with KubeCon. We're going to be talking about the operator framework becoming an official CNCF project. So for anybody that's yeah. So,
I didn't know that.
It draws this really interesting line. The first KubeCon I went to was, I want to say 2016. So it's been 4 years now. Brandon Phillips from CoreOS got up and he said, hey, I want to introduce you to this concept of operators. We're gonna start building in sort of day one and day two automation around Kubernetes applications, databases and stateful things. That evolved into the operator framework, which spawned this huge set of ISVs that wanted to build on top of Kubernetes. We spun out things like Operator Hub as a big community project. We've seen nearly 200 applications out there, and so now everything's always been open source, but especially in today's world where people are always wondering, what's the governance of something? Is it only going to be driven by a few companies? We want to make sure, and in typical Red Hat fashion, we want to, we've loved working with the CNCF, so we're excited that that's now going to be part of the CNCF as an incubating project. It's been accepted, so that should just accelerate this whole space around operators, which is really exciting.
Yeah, you're making me feel old. I remember Brandon Phillips making that announcement. I remember interviewing him.
Yeah.
With CoreOS when they made that announcement, and I remember when Red Hat started the project. Was it you I interviewed, or I interviewed someone from Red Hat about it?
Yeah, probably either me or Rob Zumsky or somebody. Yeah, I mean, we've been
both.
We've been very lucky. The CoreOS team's been great addition to the Red Hat team.
Yeah, good stuff there, and I mean that, and I'm a CNCF fan too. We're doing a Cube Virtual Summit in October.
Oh, great!
And actually, is it I always mispronounce her name. I apologize.
Oh, Priyanka.
Dan Khan was a lot easier. Priyanka.
Yeah, no, she's great. We're
going to keynote, and we've got, and then of course Liz Rice and a bunch of the other CNCF board and officers will be presenting. So we're excited with that. But so we're big supporters. I know there's been, and I don't want to get into it with you here on the show, but there's been some recent news around how we should handle open source management and trademarks versus code. And
right.
for my money, and I've been involved in open source now for 25 years, 20 years easily, and I like what I call the foundational era of open source, where no one company or no two companies control a given project, so that other people have to worry about whether their contribution is going to someone else's benefit.
Right.
And I do think it's ushered in this golden age of open source. And why would you try to kill the golden goose here? Or even, just kind of pluck the golden goose. But anyway, so yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That's great stuff. Anything else you got, Brian?
Well, I think the other thing that we love to talk about in this space is really just adoption, right? Technology is always cool. We're always going to have some new feature or some new thing, but you talk about kind of maturity. We're seeing some really cool stories that are out there, right? There's a company in Italy that just rolled out Kubernetes OpenShift to help them manage drinking fountains and water fountains and stuff. So it's sort of an IoT play that's going on. So that's kind of a cool. It's called Brian's Accu, and I'm gonna butcher that, but it looks like Brian Z Acqua or Aqua. So yeah, 900,000 customers in Italy. They're managing smart water and kiosks. It's a kind of a great way for them to provide a great public service, but because they're it's a digital display and they're putting new things on there. They're figuring out how do they turn this into a business model, but also a great community service. There's some change going on around that, so it's exciting to kind of work with them. And then the Royal Bank of Canada, one of the largest banks in Canada, just rolled out a huge AI system running on top of OpenShift and Kubernetes, and they're already seeing kind of big results in terms of reduction in hardware cost. A lot of taking advantage of NVIDIA's GPUs. They're able to run tons and tons of simulations. They're doing it for risk management. They're doing it for how to interact with the market. So it's cool to see us be able to start talking about things that aren't just Java microservices or kind of core data center things. We're seeing the whole expansion of Kubernetes into big data, into IoT, into AI and ML. So we're very we're excited that those companies want to go along for the ride with us, and we're able to help them. But it's more importantly, it's cool to just share those stories with the community, because I think every time people hear those, they see that they're real, they sort of touch them and feel them. It kind of inspires that next group to go, oh, okay, that hurdle's been crossed. We can move on to the next thing. So, for us, it's always exciting to be able to sort of co-share our customer stories with bigger communities.
Agreed. I like hearing those stories too. So it because there's the theoretical where a bunch of geeky guys and gals are working on, like my wife's family, when I try to explain to her what we do here. Oh yeah, it's about Kubernetes, and they're like, Kuber, who,
Kuber what, yeah.
Yeah, and what does that have to do with real life? But when you see real examples of how it's helping real life, and we're seeing a lot of this kind of stuff now with the COVID stuff, right? We're seeing how technology is facilitating research and potential new treatments and vaccines and healthcare for people, and it's good to be able to connect those dots, that a lot of the stuff that we toil on and we someone like you and I will sit here and talk about that may not be relevant to a lot of people outside of the IT world. No, it is relevant. What we're doing is changing the world. What we're doing is trying to make things better, and here are ways that it does.
Yeah,
so
and
good stuff.
Yeah, it's good. We go to the shows, we're sort of front and center, but when our technology works well, it's behind the scenes, and it's kind of quiet and it doesn't get in the way. So yeah, it's a cool contrast between those two, especially when we hit events like KubeCon and this whole circuit.
Absolutely. And I know you guys had a couple of other announcements. We don't need to go over every other one, but anything else in our remaining time you want to hit on?
I think the last thing we're seeing is, look, you've been around the vendor space for a long time. I've done this for a long time. Like, nobody ever wants to take difficult things and say, well, this is driving a technology trend, right? So, oh, there was an outage, you should look at disaster recovery. But I think the reality is this COVID stuff is, unfortunately, it's going to be with us for a while. And, we're seeing companies say, look, you're going to be able to work from home, maybe work from home forever. We're actually seeing people come to us and say, look, do you have COVID features? Are you putting things in that are kind of relevant to this? I'll talk about one, not to sort of pile onto this space that we're in, but we've seen a lot of companies say, look, our workforce is shifting. They're working from home. Even developers, how they manage their laptop has to be different now because of VPNs and all the way we do that. We've had some capabilities we call code ready for a long time that basically, let you, make your development environment a web environment. You don't have to spend a lot of time installing all sorts of tools on there. It's a controlled environment. So, companies can feel comfortable that like their source code's not leaving. It's controlled in terms of, what the developer sees and so forth. So we're actually seeing kind of an uptick in people saying, we're going to rethink what our developer experience looks like, just because, working from home is now becoming a reality. It's not a part-time thing. It's not a maybe for the next 3 months thing. Like, this might be the new way we work. So I think we'll see a lot of expansion around that space. Unfortunately, it's kind of getting brought up, in the challenges we have. But the good news is there's a lot of powerful sort of mature technology there for companies that are doing more work in Kubernetes. So we're excited about that.
Excellent. Brian, I want to give you a big thank you for giving us kind of a KubeCon Red Hat update.
And
You bet. Yeah,
happening?
it's always appreciate the time
is.
and great to talk to you.
I would say that I'd see you at the next KubeCon, but I think they pretty much announced that one is virtual now too.
Yeah,
I want to say in November, right?
We may see each other just like this again. So
Probably for the foreseeable future, I'm afraid. But look, next year's another year, and let's hope for the best.
That's right. So
Yeah.
Well,
until then, man,
thanks for
keep
having
up the
us.
great work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Brian Gracely from the Red Hat OpenShift team here on TechStrong TV, giving us a preview of what to expect at KubeCon. And if you're not attending KubeCon, I strongly encourage. One of the nice things about virtual events is you don't have an excuse. There's no plane, there's no hotel, there's none of that, there's no lines. Get online and check it out. Take care, Brian.
Thanks, Alan.
This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest. I remember a time where people doubted the open source business model. Everyone said, yeah, Red Hat's the only one that's ever been successful with it. You don't hear that much anymore. There's plenty of companies that have figured out how to be successful in an open source world. And I think part of it is because of the acceptance of open source, more than the acceptance, the dominance of open source in our software development world. Grafana Labs is a perfect example of this. Their CEO is Raj Dutt, gentleman I've had the pleasure of interviewing a few times now. He met the founder of the Grafana project, and they together formed Grafana Labs. Since that time, they've been supporting the Grafana open source project, the Loki open source project, which they also manage, as well as being one of the prime supporters, employers of maintainers for the Prometheus project, which is actually a project under CNCF. All through this, Grafana, of course, also offers their own enterprise software built on Grafana and utilizing, leveraging these other open source tools. And they've done really well with it. They just announced a $50 million round B on top of a $24 million round A. And, they're going to use it to keep building Grafana Labs, to keep supporting these open source projects and grow the business. It's a great company with a good future ahead of them that are really making a difference in this market. So let's now go to my interview with our CEO of Grafana Labs, Raj Dutt, to find out more.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. My guest this segment is Raj Dutt. Raj has been on with us before. Raj is the co-founder CEO for Grafana Labs, who manage the very popular Grafana open source project as well. And he'll tell us a little bit about it. But Raj is also here to break some news around the Grafana Labs, around the company. Hey Raj, welcome.
Hey Alan, good to see you again. Thanks for having me back.
Not a problem. I told you we'd have you back. So Raj, some news coming out of Grafana Labs. Why don't you share it with our audience?
Yeah, Alan, we're really excited to announce that we've completed our Series B fundraise, and we've raised $50 million to kind of accelerate everything that we're doing at Grafana Labs.
And that's a decent amount of money right there. That's congratulations, first of all. And some people may look at it, Raj, and say, my goodness, in the middle of, huge economic upheaval around the world and everything going on, with COVID and everything, these guys went out and raised $50 million. And so would you say that, global circumstances helped or hindered you here?
I mean, I don't want to, underestimate the global impact of COVID on all of our lives. But, I guess Grafana Labs is fortunate enough to pretty much be unaffected these last few quarters. The whole company's been fully distributed and remote from the very beginning. We were born that way as a remote first company. So, from a kind of working environment standpoint, there hasn't really been a lot of changes. Obviously people are, stressed out and distracted, and, that's definitely there, but we were always a remote company. And then in terms of the business, I'd say that if anything, we're seeing even more interest in what is, an open and composable observability platform, which is what we offer. And increasingly companies are looking to transition to open source, and Grafana and Prometheus and those ecosystems are where that's at.
Absolutely. So let's just get some of the record-keeping details out of the way. This round B was led by your previous lead investor, Lightspeed Ventures, was it?
That's right. Lightspeed led our Series B, and we also had participation from Lead Edge Capital. And both those investors were involved in our Series A. Lightspeed led our Series A also. So it was really nice to see, both of those firms having continued confidence in what we're building, and they were both eager to help us get to the next level.
That's fantastic, and then you're right. It's a real vote of confidence in you and the team and the company there. And the other, talk about confidence, Raj. The other thing is, look, Grafana Labs is a company that is squarely rooted in the open source business models, the open source world that we live in today. We see it in cloud native, we see it in a bunch of stuff. Excuse me. And so not only is this a vote of confidence in you and Grafana Labs, but it's a vote of confidence in the open source model as well.
Yeah, I think that's right, Alan. Open source is really kind of taking over the observability world in a similar way that it took over the infrastructure world, right? So I think so much exciting stuff is happening, and one of the things that we're really lucky as a company is we're at the center of mass, of this very wide and vibrant community of open source users, and that community is really what gives us our superpower, really, because we have hundreds of thousands of companies around the world and developers around the world who are engaged with Grafana and what we're doing with things like Prometheus and Loki, and that mind share is really important to us, and we take that responsibility of nurturing and shepherding this community very seriously, and so that's why most of the software, the overwhelming majority of the software that we build is open source. And that's also why the overwhelming majority of our users will never pay us anything. And when you really look at it, that's both a beautiful thing and part of the model. Yeah.
Absolutely. I find interesting. So Prometheus is a CNCF project or CNCF managed project, correct?
Yep.
Is Loki? I don't think so.
Nope. Loki's a project managed by Grafana Labs, like Grafana.
So Grafana Labs manages Grafana and Loki.
Yep.
Got it. And you got your finger on the pulse of the open source community, and not to take away from you guys raising your money and the news that we're here to talk about, but certainly, let's say certain people in the community lately have raised, not an issue, but raised the question of, is CNCF and these kind of big foundations like this, CDF, Linux Foundation, Cloud Foundry, Eclipse, are they becoming too beholden to the people writing big checks, companies that write big checks to the foundation, right? Or are they still and are they becoming, kind of cash marketing machines versus, watching out for the open source community, for the hundreds of thousands of people who use these projects?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Alan. I mean, there's so much money involved now, right? I mean, both in open source and particularly with these foundations, that that's kind of bound to be an issue to a certain extent, right? I mean, there's you just look at the amount of money that the CNCF makes from both cloud vendors and large enterprises, and what a marketing machine it is. So on one hand, they've definitely helped get exposure for things like Kubernetes and Prometheus and Cortex. But on the other hand, yeah, I think there's definitely an element of truth to that. And I don't think the folks at the CNCF would outright deny it. That doesn't mean that they're not a general positive force in the marketplace. I think they are. And it's also somewhat of I think they try to be a sort of neutral level playing field, but it does get political, right? For sure. And I think that that co-opting that you see both by large tech companies, the cloud vendors, they're really interested in sort of wielding their influence to get what they want out of open source, which isn't necessarily the same open source of a few decades ago. I mean, look at say the Apache Foundation, right? The Apache Foundation was really and still is, a much more pure kind of model, right?
Yeah.
But the the same time, the Apache Foundation has a annual budget that's a fraction, a small fraction of what the CNCF is, right? So, I think what you're saying is true and inevitable, and I think that at the end of the day, a lot of the developers themselves who work on things like Prometheus and Kubernetes, they're kind of to a degree immune to it, but they're often employed by these companies, right? And that creates an interesting dynamic too, right? We have a lot of the I think we're the largest employer of Prometheus core developers, right? And but I'd like to think that our kind of big tent philosophy and company culture, we really do try to be good citizens and kind of develop out in the open and just focus on the work, really, right? We're not a big tech company. I mean, maybe we're slowly becoming one, right? Particularly with
well, you keep raising money like this, my friend, but
right.
Just kidding. But you know what? To be fair, because I'm a big fan of the CNCF, right? And I think some of it is human nature, right? There's that old saying, you get two people together, you got three opinions. And so politics will always, we're political animals, humans. And so politics will always rear its head, first of all. Second of all, you know what they say about democracy, Raj? It's the best of the worst. And yes, there are other models for managing open source and stuff. But, I've been involved in open source 20 plus years myself. And I'll tell you that I really think this is kind of a golden age for open source right now. And I think a lot of the reasons why are because CNCF and similar foundations, in spite of them not being perfect, have really moved the ball forward, right? In terms of bringing it to greater communities, in terms of giving a lot of what may have been orphaned projects a home. And then in working, quite frankly, with companies like a Grafana Labs, right? Prometheus is with them, but you've got a lot of their core developers on payroll. And there are big companies who write big checks, but it's not, you don't see people saying, well, I'm not going to contribute code because it's only going to be for the benefit of big vendor AYBG or whatever, right? And so that, the world's not perfect, but this may be the best we've come up with to date. In some respects.
I think that's 100% correct, Alan. And at the end of the day, the CNCF provides a forum, right? And it's definitely not perfect, but like I said, I think they're a net force of good in the world, but a forum for all these companies to come together and build open source software together, right? And that level of collaboration would be a lot more difficult to achieve if, say, Google hadn't worked on Kubernetes within the CNCF, and it had been a Google project, right? But no company's altruistic, right? By certainly no for-profit company, and Google's no exception to that. And they did what they did to I think my view is to basically better compete with AWS and make Kubernetes really, really popular, right? And so they can do that and achieve their goal and also create a fantastic open source project that lives in a relatively neutral forum that is the CNCF, right? So, and I think that's a good thing. And CNCF isn't perfect, but it's a way that people can come together and build better software together.
Excellent. Hey, let's turn back. We're running out of time. I want to get back to Grafana. So what are you doing with the money? I know you want to advance things across all planes, if you will. But let's talk a little specific.
Sure. So we really want to kind of go faster at, kind of building out our different projects, like, not just the open source projects like Grafana and Prometheus and Loki, but we also want to further differentiate our commercial offerings and really make them, really compelling, and that's Grafana Cloud and Grafana Enterprise. You know, we just launched logging on Grafana Cloud last year, and we're going to do the same with tracing very, very soon. And we're also going to kind of come out with other products that really complement our building blocks of metrics, of logs and traces. You know, we're going to add a plethora of new data sources for Grafana, right? There's already about 50 plus data sources that Grafana connects natively to, and you know, we hope that number will get to be well over 100. You know, the other interesting thing that we're doing is, back to the community point, is Grafana's community is growing. The ecosystem is growing, right? We have this big tent philosophy, so that includes projects like Prometheus or Timescale or Elastic or InfluxDB. They all work really well with Grafana. And what we want to do is we want to create what we're calling the Grafana Accelerator Program. And we're going to provide credits on Grafana Cloud, Grafana Enterprise. We're going to provide cash investments and, in some case, grants to interesting companies and projects and individuals within the ecosystem, and really try to support what we're seeing happen, you know, and hopefully use it as a way to, you know, kind of push Grafana into new and interesting use cases that we can't even imagine yet.
Excellent, man. Couldn't happen to nicer people. Raj, we're about out of time. I want to first of all thank you for coming back on with us here on TechStrong TV, and just again, you know, since I've started a few companies over the years and raised money, and you know, once you do it, it's easier having had done it once. But to a lot of people, they hear, oh yeah, they raised a $50 million round B, you know, and we're so used to hearing big numbers and everything, and they don't really understand the magnitude of what it is to go get someone. You know, it's not coming out of someone's individual pocket per se, but to get someone to write a check for $50 million, or a group of people to write checks totaling $50 million, it's, you know, it's why, you know, it's not the kind of thing that not everyone can do, right?
I mean,
or has that talent.
The largest wire transfer that I've ever seen in my life, right? So there's that.
There is that, for sure. Hopefully you'll see more one day when you sell this thing, but we'll take it one day at a time, Raj.
Yeah, maybe. But you know, we have such a great team at Grafana Labs, so you know, that's what makes that possible, I think.
It does. It's not one person.
Not at all.
It takes a team.
You know, we just had our own little thing here, and yeah, it's about the team. Anyway, my friend, hey, congratulations. Keep up the great work. Keep us posted, and best of luck with Grafana Labs and Grafana, Loki, your Prometheus situation, and everything else. Great seeing you.
You too. Take care. Bye.
All right, Raj Dutt, CEO of Grafana Labs, announcing a $50 million Series B here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest. So for something old, as I mentioned, we're going to be going to TechStrong Con. We've been mining it for sessions now for over 2 months, but there were like 50-something sessions, so it's all good. Today's session comes to us from Ben Hindeman. Ben is the D2IQ co-founder and CTO. His presentation at TechStrong was a comprehensive guide for getting to day 2. And Ben did a big job on it. Before I send it over to you, though, I wanted to mention a couple of virtual events that we are involved in. One is the DevOps India Summit, beginning of September, and I am speaking there. We are co-producing it. It's the largest DevOps event in India when it's in person Of course, virtual, you don't have to be in India, but it is on an India time frame, in terms of clock. And if you're watching me now in India or anywhere in Asia, or you just really want to watch this, it is open to anyone. Please go register. They've got a great lineup of speakers, and it's a great show. Beyond that, in October, we have 2 big shows that we put on here at Media Ops. One is our Cube Virtual Summit, which I believe is October 1st, and we've got a great lineup of speakers already forming and more to be announced. And then at the end of October, we'll have our 3rd annual DevOps experience. I'm so looking forward to it, and we have a call for speakers and sponsorships for that open now. You can write to us for information there. Anyway, though, let's now go back to TechStrong Con with Ben Hinderman, D2IQ's co-founder and CTO, on a guide for getting to day 2.
Hey everybody, my name is Ben Hyman, and I'm really excited to be talking about a comprehensive guide for getting people to day 2 when it comes to DevOps and running container orchestrators like Kubernetes and all that good stuff. It's great to be a part of the conference and speaking to you all today. All right, so, people often hear the phrase day 2 and what does that even mean? And the way we like to think about it is the days to getting to production, the days to actually getting your platform out to production, your applications out to production. And the ideal timeline would look something like this. Day 0 is deploying X, whatever X is, some new technology that's going to help you move faster, do things, whatever it is. And on day 1, you're onboarding users to the technology, and people are taking advantage of it, and it's fantastic, and you're excited still, everything's good. And day 2, you're in production, and you've got your users using the technology, everything's running, it's all good, and that's how you got to day 2. And of course, there's many days after that, it's just maintenance. Everything post day 2, or sometimes we think of day 2 as maintenance and everything after that. But this is the ideal timeline. This is the happy timeline. This is how everything looks good. In reality, days production kind of looks something a bit more like this for a lot of organizations. Day 0, you're deploying X. Day 10, you're still deploying X. Day 100, in many circumstances, you're still deploying X. And eventually, for a lot of organizations, they just never get X deployed. Ultimately, they move to a new day 0 for some new technology because they haven't been able to actually take advantage of that technology in a serious way. And some new technologies come out instead that they decide to pivot to, or if the project that was going to use the technology doesn't need that technology anymore, the project got shut down, whatever it is. So, in this talk, we really want to talk about how we can actually get to day 2 with our technology. And because the reality is, we're all here to ship more releases. That's what we really want to do, is we want to actually ship more releases, but there's a little bit more to it. I think that the crux of what's happening is we want to ship more releases, but we're shipping more releases because we have more features. And not only do we want to ship more releases, more features, we have to support even more users. And we want to do it faster. Everything we're doing faster. And of course, we want to try to do it in a safe and secure way. And so I thought I'd kind of just talk a little about like the history of what it took for people to try to get technology to day 2. Going back to just sort of the early 2000s, not that long. Ops were hard. It was hard for people to actually get a lot of technology stood up so that people could ship more releases faster, more securely, all that stuff. And there was a lot of different technology that got created to help. But ops were hard because people were really starting to get scale for the first time. And everyone was there was a web framework kind of for everybody. And so we had to invent this new technology to really help with that. Things like infrastructure as code, technologies like Chef and Puppet, which were wildly successful for sort of taming the complexity of the fact that ops were hard. And that kind of brought us into the 2010s, where as we simplified a lot of things, we got devs to start to becoming ops. You know, devs could now not just do their development role, but they could also play the ops role, and that's sort of where DevOps started to become a really popular movement. And it makes sense, you know, as a dev, you could do most of the things you needed to on the ops side without necessarily needing to have two people doing it. So you could move faster, you could move more quickly. There's a lot more technology we built in the 2000s you could take advantage of. We're kind of going into the 2020s, ops has sort of gotten hard again. And I think the reality is what a lot of folks in the 2010s realized is even if devs could be ops, a lot of them don't necessarily want to be ops. So a lot of the DevOps practices are still really, really great practices. But I think a lot of devs expect a lot more infrastructure to be in place for them to practice many of those things. And it's that complexity of ops that I think is what's keeping a lot of people from being able to get to day two with their applications. So, you know, why have ops become hard again? Well, if we kind of break down what's going on in this world, you know, we want to ship more releases with more features, supporting more users faster and safely, securely. We can kind of unpack that, and there's a lot going on. You know, ship more releases. That means we need to do more testing. We need to be proactive about doing that testing. If we're going to be shipping more releases, we need to get information back about how those releases are doing. So we need better logging. We need to be reactive about that, capturing all that logging, storing it, making it accessible for devs to understand what's going on. We need better metrics and monitoring for the same reason. We need to be shipping more releases. We want to see what's happening with our applications, making sure they're working well. We need better alerting. We need systems in place so that people can actually, again, get insight when logs or metrics or monitor, any of these things are getting to places where people need to take action. We've got more features. So more features tends to mean more devs. There's more people building more things. We're breaking our applications into microservices. We don't have a single entity, a single monolith that we're deploying, but we've got tens of these things, hundreds of these things. You know, it's just more things, more people working on more things. We got to solve this problem of service discovery, of how things actually communicate with other things. Supporting more users means that we're going to have more failures. We have to deal with scale. We got lots of people coming and talking. We need to actually only admit so many people can talk at the same time. And then finally, you know, we want to go faster means we need to automate everything. And we can't just put all this stuff in place once and then hope that it's just going to work. We got to automate it so we can spin things up and down as quickly as possible. We can give people more environments. You know, automation is kind of the key to actually getting this to work faster. And then finally, if we're going to be doing all this stuff in a safe and secure way, we need even more testing. And we need more environments. You know, we need to actually have separated out a non-production versus a production environment. We need to figure out exactly what our storage and durability story is. We need to have everything around authn and secrets and authz figured out. We need to do proactive scanning. So, you know, the point being, ops is hard again because there's a lot of stuff that we're doing, even more so than maybe we were doing 10 years ago. And, you know, this is kind of another way for the way that we like to think about, you know, Kubernetes is more than just Kubernetes. Because for a lot of organizations, they're saying, well, we can leverage Kubernetes to make ops simple again. And the reality is there's a lot of different pieces of technology around Kubernetes that you really have to think about when it comes to actually providing a seamless, easy experience for devs to be able to run their applications on top. You know, from install to figuring out the container runtime to monitoring, logging, debugging, so forth and so on. And the way a lot of organizations, they you know, when they're thinking about taking advantage of these technologies, a lot of them end up sort of getting confronted with with this, which is really the landscape of all these technologies that satisfy all those different points that you need to think about as you're putting things together. I mean, it's no wonder ops is hard again. This is crazy. It's a lot of different pieces of technology, and people, they really have to figure out how to walk this line, right? You know, between, okay, I'm going to pick Kubernetes, and then I got to figure out which installer I'm going to use, and then I got to figure out which service discovery I'm using, and then I got to figure out how I'm going to debug, and then I got to figure out how I'm going to do logging, and then I got to figure out so forth and so on. And it's a lot of different pieces to actually figure out. On top of that, when you have all these different kinds of technologies that you're combining together, you know, keeping it up to date and secure, it's a lot of work. It's expensive and it's a lot of work. This is just looking at a couple of the different technologies, not all of them, but some of the typical ones that you'll see in a bunch of these environments. And they have, you know, numerous releases in 6-month periods, many of which are actually security releases. So it's not just a matter of taking advantage of the new releases when you're able. In many circumstances, you need to take advantage of the new releases as quickly as possible because they've got security vulnerabilities that you need to actually fix. And it's expensive. You know, it's expensive not just to go through the work of doing the updates, but also testing each of the new updates before you even put them into production to make sure that they work with your environments. You know, it's a lot of money for the people. It's a lot of money for the testing. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of work. And to find the people that can actually do that is challenging. There's people all over that are becoming experts, but it's hard to actually get as much expertise as they want for a lot of these new technologies. Some of these technologies are still being created, and we want to take advantage of them. And it's hard. It's hard. So, you know, if I sort of painted this doom and gloom, you know, we're never going to get to day 2. You know, I think that was a little bit of the point. But, you know, the juice is really worth the squeeze. And there's a lot of organizations that are getting to day 2. But they didn't just get there by putting their apps in containers or just by adopting Kubernetes. They really required a comprehensive strategy. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the talk talking about. Is I'm going to give you my comprehensive strategy in quotes, because obviously in 25 minutes I can't capture a perfect strategy, but hopefully it's valuable as organizations are thinking about digitally transforming and taking advantage of these kinds of technologies, things that they can think about as they're actually doing this process. And we are learning a lot from these organizations. There is some collective learning that people are sharing. You know, from Bloomberg, Kubernetes is only a small piece of the puzzle. From Adidas, you know, day 2, keeping it up and running, even with small workloads. You know, if something goes wrong, you don't know how these things work in detail, you're lost. So, you know, really preparing yourself for day 2 is really important. But from Intuit, you know, they've got more than 100 Kubernetes clusters running, 500 services in production and pre-production across multiple business units. So the juice is worth the squeeze. You can get there. So, what's the comprehensive strategy look like? So there's 6 things I'll talk through. First one is start with a small focused pilot. The second is invest in training and education. The third is avoid vendor lock-in, but embrace operating system lock-in. The fourth is automate everything. The fifth is test for scalability, and the sixth is get centralized visibility and governance. So without further ado, we'll dive in first. So start with a small focused pilot. So I think this is one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have when they're starting with some new technology. It's day 0, they want to deploy X. As many companies, they shoot for a bigger chunk than they can really bite off. With technologies as complicated as these, we like to advise people to try to start with something that can fail. You know, pick something that you can get up and running and you can learn from. You know, the sooner that you can start your day 0, the sooner that you're going to be able to actually get to a day 2, because the reality is you're going to learn a lot between day 0 and day 2. There's a lot of things you need to learn. So the sooner you can start actually working on a project, the better. And so for a lot of people, when they're like, well, we're not ready for, you know, the main project, our recommendation is pick something that can fail. And a great example is build and test. Yeah, it would suck if build and test failed because then devs can't get their stuff out there. But at least all your customers can continue to work with your services. The other thing that we like to think about when it comes to starting with a small focused pilot is what it means to not just get the infrastructure in place, but actually move the applications over to said infrastructure as well. If you're doing a greenfield application that you're running on top, that's the easiest thing. But if you've got some brownfield apps you're moving or you're doing a rewrite, especially if you're going through the process of transforming your monolithic applications to microservices, there's a couple good patterns you can follow. And the one I really want to call out here is Martin Fowler's strangler pattern to microservices. And he talks about, how these sounds a little bit morbid, but it's really what you're trying to do when you want to strangle the brownfield application out with all of these shooting up microservices that ultimately are gonna take over. So that's the first one. Start with a small focus pilot. Okay, second one. Invest in training and education. This is one of those ones that we've really only gotten from the many years of experience that we've now had working with a bunch of organizations. But the reality is everybody benefits from the training and education, devs, ops, and it's an ongoing thing. The best devs out there are constantly learning new technologies. They're constantly doing training and education. Providing this as mechanisms that you can actually give to your people within your organization is really, really valuable. And I think one of the things that we've learned is to embrace that continuous education that's really happening, is to think about technologies that really help enable that. One of the things that we've been working on in the past is an interactive tool that literally gives people the ability to play with the technology directly, in a terminal, in their browser, using the real technology. And that experience is so much more valuable than, say, getting education where they just read about something in a book or in a guide or in documentation, and then think that from that they're just going to be able to necessarily go and apply it all in production. And it's not just about Kubernetes. The kind of training and education you should be thinking about is the right way to actually build microservices, to build distributed systems, the right way to think about agile development and the culture you want to create. There's definitely a transition in this world with microservices, Kubernetes, and cloud native in general. That's a different culture, and in many circumstances, some of the failed projects that we've seen has sometimes less to do with the technology getting put in place and more to do with how people are actually engaging with one another and with the technology, because it requires you to think a little bit differently about how that actually works. So second one, invest in training and education, enable it to be continuous for people to do it. It's not just for people that want to continue to get training. You're going to be hiring new people as well. They'll want to be able to take advantage of whatever training and education information that you gave to the previous batch of people. Okay, number 3. I call this one avoid vendor lock-in, but embrace open source software lock-in. So what does that mean? You've heard a lot about it. You should be infrastructure and cloud agnostic, but it's kind of tough. I think for a developer at the end of the day, they're kind of in this tough situation where they're like, well, how can I be, I got to move fast. I got to build my application. How can I avoid lock-in? It's really, really tough to actually avoid lock-in. So, the balance that we like to think of is, well, what you'd like to avoid if you can is lock-in to proprietary technologies where you can never, ever change your underlying infrastructure, your underlying cloud, whatever it is. But you're probably going to have to get locked into something. So because you're taking advantage of other technologies, so try to get locked into the open source interfaces of open source projects. Things like Kubernetes, things like Kafka, things like Cassandra, things like Spark, technologies that have strong open source communities that you can, lock your applications into because you're actually speaking those interfaces. And then if whichever infrastructure user you're using, for whatever reason, it doesn't make sense to use those infrastructure users anymore, it's going to be much easier to move those applications. You just have to find another infrastructure or cloud where you can spin up those technologies, run those technologies, and your applications can continue to run. So this is where we like to think of, lock yourself into the open source APIs, not the proprietary services, as much as you can. In some circumstances you can't. In some circumstances, there's technologies that are only provided by a particular infrastructure, and you've done the math and the homework, and it makes sense to use that technology because your own applications are going to benefit dramatically from it. But then that's okay. That's a small percentage of your application that's just using that one piece. As long as everything else, the 90% of your application is leveraging these open source APIs, then if you need to ever move to some other infrastructure, it's just that 10% that you have to actually rewrite or change or modify or whatever it is. Okay. Number 4, automate everything. In today's world, sometimes we like to declare success once we've got, technology stood up, but that's really just your day one. Getting to day 2 is really about everything being 100% automated, where as an ops person and as you're standing this all up. Our suggestion is start again with the things that you're trying to automate that can fail. Build tests, CI/CD. But ultimately, when we say automate everything, we really mean automate everything. Everything to stateful applications as well. Automating stateful apps is an immense amount of high beta. The value you get from being able to automate some of these more complicated things is huge, but it can come with a consequence. In this world, one of the values of automating everything is giving yourself things that make it easier to understand what's really happening in your environment, what's happened in the past in your environment, what's currently happening, and ultimately the ability to possibly roll back to previous versions that you know that worked. So we like to think of, in the realm of automating everything, use version control for as much as possible, make everything be as declarative as possible, and then when you have those pieces and everything's automated, you can roll back to previous versions. You can do what you need to do to help keeping everything up and running well. This is just a shout out to an open source project that we started and we work with a bunch of other people in the community on, called Kudo. And Kudo stands for the Kubernetes Universal Declarative Operator. And it's technology to really help you automate those stateful, complicated data services that I was talking about on the previous slide. Again, they're really high beta. When you can run these things in an automated way on your platform, there's tons of benefits to doing so, but they're complicated. They're very complicated pieces of technology. So we wanted to simplify all that complications and in a way where we could bring things like Spark, Cassandra, Kafka to your Kubernetes clusters more easily, and that's what Kudo's for. So take a look if you're looking at actually automating some of your stateful big data-like applications. Okay, number 5. This one's kind of interesting. I realized after chatting with a bunch of organizations that they do understand the value of testing and they do a bunch of testing, but testing sometimes only goes so far. And sometimes the test environments that people actually put together, they don't really help give themselves a good understanding of how the application is actually going to do in the wild. So the way we like to think about this is to really get that understanding, you should test for scalability. We found that when we chat with organizations about saying test for scalability, they tend to run better workloads on top of their applications that do a better job of actually capturing how the application is going to run. Because the truth is when you actually test for scalability, you learn the limits. You learn the limits about how your applications actually run. And therefore, you can start doing smart things about admission control. You can start doing smart things about when you want to put alerts in place. There's lots of things you can start to do to actually have a better idea of when everything should just work the way it's supposed to work, and when, hey, we should take some other action. So test for scalability as much as possible. You know, I think that the last point I'll make to this is this can be a daunting task, and it can be an expensive endeavor as well. You know, this actually is a little bit old, but it's some of the scalability that we actually test for some of our own products internally. And spinning up clusters to actually do this kind of testing, we like to joke, you know, costs a really nice car every month. But the value that you actually get from it is fantastic. Okay, number 6, last but not least, is get centralized visibility and governance. We talked all about the monitoring, the logging, the alerts, all those pieces, and it's pretty critical in these worlds. The truth is organizations are really running disparate bunch of different clusters. They have one-off deployments of many of these different clusters or technologies. They're on multiple clouds. They're on-prem and on the cloud. And it's just, for a lot of folks, it's just this chaos. They've got stuff everywhere. And getting the visibility into what's happening is sort of one of the first ways that you can start to really rein in that chaos. So, you know, visibility and governance means many things. This is just sort of a collection of some of the things that we think about. Number 1, security. Who can do what? Number 2, monitoring. Have standardized monitoring and alerts. Number 3, chargeback. How much are people actually consuming? Are they consuming more than you planned on them consuming, or that they are particularly paying for? On the who can do what, there's also just who's who. Who says, you know, who's actually the people that they say they are. And then sort of related to that on the networking side, who can actually talk to who. Related again to who can do what, and who can talk to who. There's lots of different technologies out there that can help you answer these questions, that can help you give you this functionality. It again just contributes to that landscape that I mentioned about all the different pieces that you actually want to take. But it's important to think about these technologies because they're really critical to actually giving you that day 2 visibility and governance. Okay, so you know that's the comprehensive strategy that I wanted to share. I hope that maybe there's a couple ideas in there that are valuable as you're thinking about your own journey and digitally transforming your organizations and moving into more of these. You know, at D2IQ, we like to practice what we preach. You know, our product portfolio directly, of course, captures how we think about the world, everywhere from Conductor, which is our interactive, self-guided training platform, Convoy, which is our Kubernetes distribution, Dispatch, which is our way of doing CI/CD, Kudo, as I mentioned, the open source project for doing stateful workloads, and ultimately Commander, which gives you governance and visibility across all your clusters. We believe that they're a critical part to having a successful experience with Kubernetes and getting from day 0 all the way to day 2. So thanks so much for listening. Hope there was something in there for you, and good luck getting to day 2.
Great job there by Ben from TechStrong Con. Day 2 DevOps, it's real. Let's now go to a quick roundup of news around the media ops neighborhoods. At Security Boulevard, we have stress, age, play role in cyber mistakes. I don't disagree. Fighting fraud amid a pandemic, follow the money. Pandemic or not, you should always follow the money. Over on Container Journal, Linux Foundation launches Jenkins X training course. And I think we are, Jenkins itself recently graduated from CNCF. Now, of course, Jenkins X, which works in a Kubernetes environment, has become very, very popular. So we now have real training courses for it. Next up after that, we have New Vector updates container security platform. Good stuff from our friends at New Vector. And then Sysdig. It's good to see them. Sysdig previews container security report. It's a little interesting. Mike Vizard has that one. Then over on DevOps.com, we have how to build a business data map, an important piece of your thing. And then why service meshes are security tools. Spotify takes open source portal project to phase 2, which is good for Spotify. And DevOps Unbound, a brief history of testing. It's a replay of what we've played here on DevOps Unbound. It's on DevOps.com now with a transcript. Check it out. Now we're going to head things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene has some great interview today with Campbell Brown, CEO of Predict HQ, on demand intelligence, as well as a great preview of this week's webinars. And I'll be back after to head things over to Mitch. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops, and I am here on Zoom now with Cam Brown. Campbell Brown, Cam Brown. Which do you prefer? Okay, all right, great.
Yeah, Cam's fine.
Okay, great. CEO of a company called Predict HQ. Thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. Really do appreciate it.
No problem. It's great to be here.
Okay. Great. So I'd like to talk to you. I know your company is very involved in, I guess it's the predictive analytics space and big data, and would really love to have a conversation with you about that space in general, but also regarding how companies can use, the technology to kind of form their plans moving forward in today's uncertain economic environment brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I was wondering, first of all, if you can kind of walk me through what your company does, what your technology is, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, great. So what we call our business is a demand intelligence business. And so what that means is there's a massive, I guess, gap in market around people understanding why around demand. So why did we see an increase in sales on this particular day? And why did we see a decrease in sales on this other particular day? And by understanding that why, you can do things like adjust pricing, have more staff on, have less staff on, have more stock in play, whatever it may be. So we work across anyone from travel, retail, CPG, finance, to help them better understand that why around demand. And so at the core of our business is we have an API. And that API has a vast amount of information such as events. And so when I talk about events, it could be something like a sports game, but it could also be something like a shelter-in-place lifting or being put back in place. Mm-hmm. And so all of these act as catalysts for incremental or decremental demand. And so a lot of our information is then infused or integrated within demand forecasting. And so historically, demand forecasting is very much around just looking historically and trying to predict the future, but we provide a whole nother element that is super dynamic in this current world and before that.
Yeah, so I know that to your point, a lot of industries are using this data now to kind of help predict their sales and help them better accommodate, like inventory control in retail. I know hotels use it for, setting the prices of rooms based on information such as, maybe concerts that are happening in the area or weather advisories that might actually bring in a massive number of people off the road that don't have reservations,
yes.
Things of that nature. So how does that change when we're talking about, health especially health warnings such as the pandemics or and any other type of health event that might might have an impact on a short-term and long-term economic outlook for a business?
Yeah, it's kind of multifaceted. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, it's about adapting to the now. So how can we help a retailer understand if there is a government mandated restaurant closure in the state of California? So that's being able to really adapt quick now. The other thing we're finding is there's this massive information deficit, and that's going to be felt for years to come. So how do you understand, how can you forecast to 2021, 2022 by understanding what's going on today? And I think the best thing that we're doing here is we're capturing all this information so it can be used historically as well. Meaning that next time, maybe it doesn't make it to a pandemic level, but let's say there's epidemic level in Canada, you can actually understand, well, this is what's going to happen. You know, this is what happened to our sales when this epidemic kicked off or pandemic kicked off. And so providing that single source of truth around history as well is also important. And so it's just a really critical part of the fabric of forecasting. And so we're helping customers adapt right now. And we just launched a notifications platform last week that allows people to adapt to not only the changes in the market at the moment brought on by COVID, but also we've got a hurricane down in Florida at the moment. And we've got, and so these things are in such a volatile market. If you can find out and understand and adapt to these, then you're going to mitigate your losses as well.
Okay. So, from working with your customers, seeing what's been happening in the market, I guess, do you have any kind of anecdotal information that you might be able to pass on to our viewers based on what you're seeing in the market, what your customers are seeing in relation to kind of maybe what's coming down the pike based on what they've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a really good example of things to be prepared for, which is pent-up demand. And so what I mean by that is actually when things are not just when we keep on getting put back into the box or siloed, but it's also what happens when it turns and what happens when that pent-up demand shifts. And so I guess, we saw a clear example of that in my home country, New Zealand, when shelter in place was lifted, and I think we saw 6% of New Zealand go to McDonald's on that Monday, and they completely sold out of everything. But I mean, that's at a very macro scale, but these little microcosms are going to be happening all over the place and at a very hyper-local level. And so I think what we see in a lot of our customers and forward-thinking customers is having those recovery teams. So what are we doing now, but also what are we going to do in the future? Because the key thing for them is understanding where these pockets of demand are going to occur. And the reason I say that is it's just nothing's equal. You've got one country that's completely COVID free, and then you've got another country that's not. And then you've now got states that are doing really well and other states that are not. And so having that visibility on what's going on where is super critical for businesses. And that's what our customers are adapting to, is how can we make sure that we pounce on those pockets of demand that occur, whether, by whatever event that could be, whether it's a school holiday, public holiday, but also how can we mitigate any potential additional compounding loss by mitigating against, or adapting quickly to things like natural disasters or health warnings, which again is another category that we launched last week.
Okay. All right. Great. So, one of the things that we all seem to notice was at the start of the pandemic here in the States, everybody went remote working and productivity shot up. But it seems like, now like 4 or 5 months in, 6 months in, that productivity is kind of starting to dip a little bit. And I'm not sure if it's because of, summertime, or if it's just people are tired of working from home all the time, or they, for whatever reason. But has your company collected any data or seen anything related to kind of productivity climbs and dips and how that's kind of affecting the economy in general, or is that anything that you guys have have dealt with at all or worked on?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, just if you look at, I mean, we're kind of in a unique position. So all of our development and data science resources actually in New Zealand, and so our deployments have continued to climb week on week, which is great. But now we've actually got most of the staff back in the office in New Zealand. I think the key thing we've kind of seen there is we've made it optional, though, in terms of, so we've gone full-time hybrid effectively. But what we're seeing is around about 80 to 90% of our staff still going into the office 4 or 5 days a week. So it's really interesting to watch that. Well, obviously over here in the US, we're still fully remote. And I think to your point around the initial productivity side is just understanding from a human side that this is really tough to deal with. And I think you see that come through. And so we're just trying to invest as much time and effort as we can into our staff over here in the US in particular to make sure that they're okay and make sure that they're still able to, just see through that this will come to an end. Obviously, we can't predict when that's going to happen, and just giving them the steps at which they can kind of deal with it, on a personal level as well. But yeah, it's such a odd thing for us to jump onto a Zoom call and we see, all of the staff in New Zealand around the board table in New Zealand, and we're sitting here all in our homes in the US. So it's a really, really odd thing. But it does, I guess the one thing I would say, because I don't want to be negative all the time, is it does fill me with joy to see someone like New Zealand bounce back so quickly, and for them to kind of go back to that kind of next normal, which is really really interesting to watch.
Yeah. Well, kudos to New Zealand for doing all the right things and getting over the COVID crisis so quickly. So you guys have got it going on there for sure. All right. So, looking ahead then, obviously, especially since, to your point, New Zealand is pretty much quote unquote back to normal. But other countries such as the United States are still kind of struggling. So, based on that and based on the data, and besides that kind of that surge in desire or need that you expect organizations to see as things start opening up again, do you see that we what might actually be kind of headed in a more downward trend in the future as we see possibly a greater number of states here in the US start rolling back their plans to reopen and things of that nature, or what is your data telling you regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we, in particular, what we see a lot of in the attended events that we track. Obviously, in places like New Zealand and even in Europe, we're seeing economic recovery through those events which are driving it. In the US, attended events are slower to come back and will be slower to come back. And so I guess the reason I bring that up is they drive such a large part of the economy, both on a national scale and at a local scale as well. So I think if you just look at it from a day-to-day thing, I think, look, this is bound to impact the economy and continue to impact the economy. And I think businesses need to be considerate not just of the impacts of COVID, but the long-lasting impact to the economy, and how do you see your business, working within that particular environment? And I think we look at the next, we just don't look at the next 6 months. We kind of look at the next 2 to 3 years, and how do we come out of this in the US market, kind of running at 1 million miles an hour, and also what technology do we bring to market that also allows us to continue to thrive as well, and also help other businesses thrive. Because for us, at the core of our business is we want other businesses to be able to adapt to demand. And so we want them to be able to utilize that and help them in that recovery process as well. And so we've got a project at the moment that is kind of a world first project that we're going to be bringing out in September. And we're just super excited about it because it can help a vast amount of businesses in the US and abroad as well.
Excellent. Well, Cam, I know that we still have some tough times ahead here in the States, at least. So fingers crossed that things are going to improve sooner rather than later. But certainly having the data is going to help a lot of organizations kind of get past this and hopefully find a path forward. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate your time and your expertise, and I wish you the best. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Charlene.
Okay. All right, everybody, please stay tuned. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stick around.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here with the Monday edition of the Webinars Preview. We have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com in the next week or so. Really hope that you'll be able to find some time to join us for at least one or perhaps more of the webinars. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the ones we have coming up. The first one I want to let you guys know about is happening tomorrow, Tuesday, August 18th at 1 p.m. on DevOps.com. That's 1 p.m. Eastern. The title is Why Distributed Tracing is Essential for Performance and Reliability. This webinar is being sponsored by Lightstep, and it's basically a primer on the fundamentals of distributed tracing and how organizations can use it not only to understand a distributed system, but also help them improve and prioritize their engineering work. So if you've ever been interested in distributed tracing, want to learn more about it, this is definitely the webinar for you. The next webinar I want to let you know about is happening Wednesday, August 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern. This one is sponsored by ConnectAll, and it's called Accelerate Delivery by Understanding DevOps Feedback Loops and Value Stream Management. We all know about value stream management. It's a hot topic these days, but maybe less discussed is the DevOps feedback loop. So this webinar talks about how organizations can use feedback loops to improve their DevOps processes, and basically how feedback loops fit into the value stream management equation. So definitely a must. It's a great primer for all things DevOps and feedback loops. So take the time and watch this webinar if you're interested in finding out more about how feedback loops can work for you. Okay, the final webinar I want to let you guys know about is happening Wednesday, August 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern. This one is called Optimize Your CI/CD with GitLab and AWS, and it is sponsored by GitLab. So in this webinar, GitLab and Amazon Web Services are going to talk about how they are integrating to provide a best-of-breed CI/CD solution. A best-of-breed development workflow for CI/CD work solution, and also their application infrastructure, and how the two companies are really working together to kind of improve DevOps processes all around. So if you're working with GitLab, you're working with AWS, and you want to see how the two can work together better, this webinar is definitely worth your time. Again, this one is happening Wednesday, August 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. Okay, that's it for today's edition of the Webinars Preview. Please check back tomorrow. We've got lots more webinars to tell you about. Until then, please stay safe, and I'll see you on Tuesday.
All right. Our next segment is, as usual, after Charlene, we go to the Analyst Corner with Mitch. It's Mitchell Ashley, CEO, co-founder of Accelerated Strategies Group, and Mitchell has some great analysis and interviews today. Mitchell, take it away.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. I was trying to think of what to talk to you about, and I had so many things that I wanted to chat with you about. But one that came up here recently I thought would be a good conversation to bring up, and that's around password managers, credentials management, kind of PAM, privilege access management in the kind of analyst world of products and categorization. With all of the changes we've seen in work patterns, was working from home or just disrupting the systems, the tools, the applications that we're using. I mean, many organizations have accelerated their online cloud transition, digital transformation. Some people believe by several years, but we may be, 3, 4, maybe even 6 years ahead of where we would have been had we not had COVID happen and all the consequences of it. But I think some of the lower level, easier things to take care of are oftentimes what we miss. I know it's certainly easy for me to focus on the big shiny object or the big problem or the big change and not necessarily go back and look at, well, what about the things that are going to really bite us? Because in the security world, it's yes, there are big opportunities to break into networks, but it usually happens through small, low barrier to entry breaches. Oftentimes phishing attacks. There's just talking with some folks about VPN phishing attacks. Reaching out to someone in the organization masquerading to be an IT person, maybe even knowing who the IT person is, and claiming that the VPN concentrator is down and here's an alternative for you. Go here and sign up. And of course, it's collecting lots of goody information, goody hot information. But those are the things that really need attention right now. And so I think about password managers and how many people don't use a password manager. Whether you have single sign-on, that's great. And you may even have single sign-on into many of your cloud applications. But I would venture to guess there are some apps employees are using, that's a pretty easy guess, that aren't tied into the normal corporate security systems. And those are extremely vulnerable, of course, to reuse of passwords and all kinds of challenges with less than secure credentials. So now's the time to reach out to end users. And you may have heard on other conversations that have been a part of in CISO talk and CIO conversations, et cetera, that while I think end user training is important, I think it's useful. I think it's a false panacea to rely on that because only so much, will that training stick. And also when push comes to shove and people need to get a job done, they're going to get the job done. And oftentimes that might mean they're going to sacrifice some security or they're willing to for convenience. And passwords are just like that. So now may be a great opportunity because end users are sort of overwhelmed with passwords for different accounts that they may be using, for in their home life as well as their work life. And what a great opportunity to say, we can really simplify this. It has a browser plugin. It will enter the credentials for you. You'll have to do one login to it, kind of like our SSO. There's all kinds of really good advantages. And of course, you kind of build up the stack to software teams and deployment environments and where we should be using Vault and other kinds of key storage, password storage, certificate storage, tokens, etc. So think about that. See if that might be something, if you aren't already jumping on, what a winning way to help end users improve their experience, not having to juggle with so many accounts and passwords, as well as improving your own security and not having to worry so much about reused passwords and things that may be happening outside in the shadow IT or other parts of applications that IT isn't necessarily fully managing. Wish you the best. Always love to hear from you. Mitchell at accelst.com.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hey, Mitch, thanks very much for that.